Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth George, Director of Member Engagement and Chapter Development with the American Guild of Organists. And I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, The New Oxford Organ Method. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes. This is being recorded, and probably within 24 hours, the recording will be uploaded onto our website. We'll send out to everyone a link of where you can get to the recording. But as well, you are muted, but that doesn't mean we want not to hear from you. We do want to hear from you. So using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, please post your questions throughout this webinar, and we will make sure that they are answered. So at this point, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our presenters. Anne Marsden Thomas is one of the most influential organist teachers of today and has written, compiled, and edited over 20 books for organists. She is Director of Music at St. Giles Cripplegate Church, City of London. She's received many honors, including the MBE in 2015. She teaches organ at the Royal Academy of Music, the Junior Academy, and the Royal College of Organists. Dr. Frederick Stockin is a widely commissioned and performed composer whose recorded and broadcast music ranges from organ and choral pieces to orchestral music. His publications include not only compositions, but also musicology and keyboard tutors. He is organist of St. George's Roman Catholic Church, London, and teaches organ at the Royal Academy of Music, the Junior Academy, and for the Royal Colleges of Organists. It gives me great pleasure to present to you Anne Marsden Thomas and Dr. Frederick Stockin.
Good evening, everyone. What a privilege to be amongst you all tonight. I know Frederick and I are very much looking forward to spending this hour with you, talking to you about our newer book, New Oxford Organ Method. When several years ago, Oxford University Press, OUP, invited us to write a new method book for the organ, Frederick and I were in the final year of writing our two graded keyboard musicianship books. Working together on those keyboard musicianship books was fun at every stage. We even turned the proofreading into a competition. So we accepted the new commission with excitement, confident that we could do it, although awed by the honor in being chosen to write the first new organ method book for OUP since C.H. Trevor's in 1971. We began by choosing the pieces for our method. Then Frederick composed the studies and I began drafting the text. But from that point on, we worked side by side, together, revising and reworking every page countless times. OUP still regards our successful co-authorship as a novelty. They were certain it would end in tears, because apparently co-authors are notorious for falling out with each other. But we can honestly say that working together throughout the process was immensely beneficial. And we were delighted to prove OUP wrong, as we are still friends.
Between us, we have accumulated about 80 years of organ teaching experience. That experience has taught us many things, including that students, above all, like learning pieces. They don't mind learning technique, but they don't always understand why they need it. Our experience confirms, too, that students often struggle with sight reading and that it's challenging to build their confidence in registration. Nor are they always clear how to learn. We decided to integrate all these aspects into our method. We think it's the first book to teach registration, technique, style, interpretation, and sight reading. And that is the first method book to base the entire teaching, all those topics, in a seamless flow. Let's explain in more detail. There are 20 chapters, each centered around a single piece, and every chapter follows the same pattern. And now we have a film of about 20 minutes. Each chapter starts with a short introduction and then explains a fresh concept in registration. We usually slip in a technical exercise at this point too, asking students to listen to their chosen registration while they play, for example, a scale or broken chord. We then move into the style and technique section of the chapter. All the training in this section is inspired by the piece. There is then a bridge section linking the style and technique training with the piece itself, called Towards the Performance. This section has two main functions. First, it guides the student in learning the piece. Secondly, Towards the Performance aims to inspire the student with musical ideas. Then the piece itself, fully marked up with fingering and footing. Finally, there are three specially composed pieces which we called studies. Another technical exercise usually precedes each study, and each study revises one of the topics introduced in the style and technique section.
The first major hurdle was to identify 20 engaging pieces in graded order. The pieces had to develop technique systematically, introduce with each piece new points of registration and expression, and cover all major styles. But at what level should the method start? What previous keyboard experience should the beginner have? We agreed that the beginner must have some keyboard experience, and what we describe in the method equates to about ABRSM Piano Grade 3. But we also want the experienced organist to find the method useful for overhauling their technique and their understanding of style. So here are the pieces we chose. Part 1, 10 pieces teaching ordinary touch. That's right, we start with ordinary touch because it's almost always a new experience for beginner organists. Part 2, 7 pieces teaching legato touch. And part 3, the final pieces, teaching more advanced style and techniques. Before part 1, there is practical advice called Getting Started and an introduction to the instrument.
Now let's explore the chapters, highlighting a few ingredients from each. Part 1 devoted to ordinary touch with associated style and technique. Chapter 1. The first piece is this two-voice Air by Purcell. The chapter teaches how to select a single 8-foot stop, ordinary touch, the 5-finger hand shape, and position fingering. One of the 3 studies that follows the piece revises the important skill of coordinating the hands, especially releasing together. Chapter 2 teaches the 4 tonal families, working towards Larghetto by Charles Wesley, and then explains how to manage stops of higher pitches. Helped by our list of stops at the back of the book, you see that we list stops under their tonal families. We introduce pedalling in Chapter 3, Verset by Martini. Coordinating hands and feet is easy in the piece because it uses only one note in each foot. In the chapter, we show how to operate the foot from the ankle joint. Then we introduce the student to note finding based on what we call the home position, middle C and E on the pedal board.
After the piece, one of the studies reminds students about finding home position on the pedals. By the way, you see that above the study on this page. We suggest how to prepare these studies when using them for sight reading. Stops, key, feet, hands, and time. Chapter 4 is based on a French classical piece by Charpentier. The student tries out the registration while playing a scale in the key of the piece. Unlike most methods, we include scales in every key. We realised that, as well as their benefit for building technique and key awareness, our scales could have additional purposes: to try out registration, to introduce the key of a piece or study, and perhaps even to reinforce a freshly learned technique. So we distributed the scales throughout the method wherever they're helpful. Our scales often have new twists, like added pedal parts. Chapter 5 is based on a chorale variation by Pachelbel, and here the teaching develops touch, subtle variation of touch in the busy left hand, a singing line with the right hand's fifth finger, and coordinated releases. Next comes an old favourite, Prelude in F, attributed to Bach. Previously, the student has only needed to shift one note per foot. Now, they learn to measure intervals between their feet, using their heels as a hinge to measure seconds and thirds between the toes, what we call the heel V shape, using their knees as a hinge to measure fourths and fifths, the knee V shape. We always insist on knees together, as we believe it's the quickest way simultaneously to establish confident note finding and a streamlined technique. Chapter 7 prepares students to play 2 concerto movements by Albinoni, which we arranged for solo organ. Towards the performance in that chapter, as always, recommends specific practice strategies. We've underlined them for this presentation, and you see that they are numbered. Practice strategy 8, use your pencil. Strategy 1, slow staves segments. Strategy 6, speak instructions. And strategy 11, metronome practice. These practice strategy numbers refer to a 7-page section at the front of the method, which lists and explains 20 practice strategies.
Chapter 8's piece is a Preludium in F by Krebs. The teaching here includes pivoting the lower body so the knees hover halfway between the position of the feet and finding an octave between the feet. One of the studies which close this chapter revises pedal octaves. When teaching, we find the studies useful as revision of the previous lesson's topics, like traditional studies. The student can also use these studies to practice performing, either at sight or after a slightly longer period of preparation. Most of all, however, we love that now we always have a ready stock of pieces to use for sight reading. Chapter 9 develops contrapuntal playing in a short fuguetta by Bach. Topics include managing an inner voice as it travels between the hands, and what to do when voices collide on the same note. Here is one of the studies which revises the collision of voices.
Chapter 10 is a new piece, Rising Passacaglia, by Frederick, which prioritises the pedals. The teaching here reminds the student again that ordinary touch is not a one-dimensional approach, but covers a range of expressive touch and even different periods. Part 2 introduces legato touch. Many teachers and most previous method books start with legato touch, but we have many reasons for starting with ordinary touch, reserving the complexities of legato touch on the organ until this stage. You're welcome to explore our reasons in the Q&A section after this talk. The first piece students learn in Part 2 is the Haunting Elegy by Walton for manuals only. The chapter's topics introduce note commune and finger substitution. The first study to follow Walton's Elegy features finger substitution, and the scale that precedes it teaches students how to substitute fingers in double-third scales for each hand. The next chapter introduces legato pedalling, including the use of toes and heels on adjacent notes. As always, these exercises are drawn from the piece, in this case, Quasi Allegro by Franck from L'Organiste. Now the scales are more ambitious. Here we have a G minor scale with hands a sixth apart and an independent line in the feet. Chapter 13 is based on Offertoire by Boelman. The build-up to the piece includes exercises which illustrate how to operate the swell pedal with the right foot, while both feet play a legato line, and help the student make manual and stop changes. We estimate this piece is about ABRSM organ grade 6 standard. As you listen to Salomé's Grand Chœur, the subject of chapter 14, you will hear how this piece was a good opportunity for us to introduce legato pedal scales.
In the next chapter, we introduce pedal navigation points, sometimes called gaps. We introduce this note-finding technique late in the method. This is chapter 15, having learned from experience that many students who rely on this technique check every note individually, pointlessly jabbing in and out of those gaps. And we only encourage navigation points that maintain the inward tilt of the shoe. that is C and F in the left foot, B and E in the right. Then we show students how to apply the technique they have learned to the piece, Trio by Reinberger. But first, in the chapter's topics, we provide the complete pedal part, annotated to show students how to apply the techniques they have learned, including those navigation points. And here is the opening of the piece, so you can hear the pedal part in context. One of the pedalling topics in this chapter is substituting one foot for another on a sustained note, and there is also a study which revises this new skill. Prelude by Reger comes next. Reger specifies tiered dynamic levels, so the chapter begins by explaining how to choose these levels and how to scroll between them. The chapter also highlights new challenges in controlling legato touch. Now students develop resourcefulness in organ management using presets, pistons, if they have them. Just as we remind students in Part 1 that ordinary touch is far from being a one-dimensional approach, in the next chapter, Chapter 17, Solomon's Aria, we remind students that legato also adapts to fit differing circumstances, encouraging them to listen closely to the link between notes. This piece requires the right foot to move between swell pedal and the pedal board without breaking legato. Here are some of the exercises that develop that skill, as always complete with bar references from the piece.
Part 3 completes the method with lessons in advanced interpretation. First comes a dialogue by Dondrieu, which returns to the French classical period. You may remember that we had a simple French classical piece in Chapter 4. But now we have new registrations, new ornaments, note en égard, and contrasting moods. Lento by Frank Bridge develops expression through touch, phrasing of independent voices, and graded dynamics. The big letters you saw on the score refer to the registration chart in the chapter. Organ management occupies much of this chapter, as we explain how to rise seamlessly from piano to forte and back to pianissimo, in a scheme which will suit even a modest two-manual organ. This chapter also teaches students to operate the swell pedal with the left foot, and one of the studies focuses on that skill. final piece is the first part of Buxtehude's Preludium in C. Its style, the Stilus Fantasticus, encourages students to develop their musical personality. The rhetorical gestures the student learns to manage are silence, descending scales, and dotted figures.
We've road tested every chapter many times in one-to-one lessons, and we find there are broadly 3 ways of using this method. First, some students need detailed support throughout the learning process. These students like to read the text aloud in the lesson, or the teacher can, maybe paraphrasing it. We worked hard to reduce the text to an absolute minimum. Students play every exercise, and the teacher checks the student's success at each stage. Towards the performance, guides the student in learning the piece, and here too, teacher and student may need to work together.
Secondly, some students are confident and like working independently. These students enjoy working through the chapter alone and presenting the piece at their next lesson. This saves significant time in the lesson. One of my beginner students has worked through the whole book like this up to chapter 19 in just 7 months.
Thirdly, some students haven't got a teacher and may have to survive for long periods without one. We wanted this method to be thoroughly comprehensive so that such students can progress independently. There are more resources, optional extras linked to the method available online. There are listening suggestions to accompany each chapter. There are also 2 extra pieces that we suggest you can insert between each chapter. Together with the 20 pieces in the method, this makes a suite of 60 pieces in graded order. We hope that all students, whether or not they have a teacher, will find this method flexible and approachable. Our aim is that the method helps every student to enjoy a lifetime of, to quote Peter Herford, making music on the organ.
Well, thank you both. That was an incredible presentation. And we did have some questions posted in the Q&A box. The first one was where they could purchase this. And while the recording was going on, I found it on Amazon, so they can purchase it there. Anne and Frederick, are there any other websites that you know where this can be purchased?
I believe it's available through many different websites. Of course, we're not experts on where you buy things in America, but certainly there are various websites in the UK where you can purchase. Frederick, do you want to add to that?
Well, OUP, of course, has its own website. You can buy things through OUP, but I think people I know are buying it through Amazon mainly. And music, just any music shop, really. I'd hope all mainstream music shops have it.
Excellent. Another question was, are there guidelines included for organ bench heights, for leg lengths? Are there guidelines included for distance of body / bench from the keyboards?
Who's going for that one, Frederick?
Would you like to start?
I will, yes. The quick answer is yes, most definitely. I'm a very tall woman, and I teach students of all ages and heights. In fact, my smallest student at the moment is 10 years old and very short indeed, and we've even had an adjustable desk made for one of the organs where I teach. Yes, most definitely. Just in a nutshell, I always advise that the bench should be adjusted to suit the convenience of the feet. So that will dictate how far back the bench is, and it will also dictate the height of the bench. And that's all carefully described in the book. I can say more if necessary, but I don't want that particular issue perhaps to take up too long. Frederick, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, just to endorse what you said, really, Anne, and obviously our teaching of pedaling is crucially wrapped up, of course, with the height of the bench, and having that those slightly dangling feet, which we actually talk about in the actual introduction. When people get started, we talk about the ideal position to get going, where you're on your sitting bones, and we work from there really in we hope very calibrated stages.
Thank you. We have two questions. Is there a CG accompanying this book? And please elaborate on knee together technique, as it is not always utilized.
Shall I start this one?
Yes.
Well, we've recorded all the pieces. They're all on SoundCloud, and available. We've got a dedicated website, web page on Oxford University Press. So we've recorded all the pieces and some of the studies, not all of the studies by any means. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Knees together.
Please elaborate on knee together technique.
Yes, well, we've both got to talk about this, Anne, because it's such a crucial part of our teaching, isn't it? So that, I mean, knees together is a very venerable tradition of organ playing. I mean, Vidor, goes right back in the French school. It's not a modern idea at all. It's a very old idea. And we believe it's so good because it encourages the most economical way of finding the pedals, and it's the most streamlined technique, and it's the one that really provides the most solid technical foundation to organ playing. I'm sure Anna's got more to add to that.
Yes, I mean, there is so much one could say, isn't there? I suppose uppermost in my mind, the benefits of keeping your knees together. One, because you can treat the knees as a hinge, and then you measure intervals between your toes by just remembering the distance between the feet with what we call the knee V shape. That does, of course, require you to shift the position of your knees according to where the interval is on the pedal board, and that's why we also teach in some detail how to pivot so as to access the extremities of the pedal board. That's one thing, but the other thing is in the beginning stages, of course, one is persisting with one student to get them to play on the inside edge of the shoe, the strong and agile way of using the feet. And all you do, link your knees, and immediately the feet tilt to the inside edge. So there are other benefits, but those are the two main ones.
And also, just to say something very simple and obvious, but incredibly important, we're encouraging people not to look at the pedals when they play. And of course, developing these systems of hinges and pivoting means that you can develop a reliable pedal technique without having to look down.
Yes.
Thank you. Would you please share more about your reasons for focusing on ordinary touch first?
Shall I do that one first? Yes, again, multiple reasons. I remember years ago, I used to teach the piano, and when children came for their first lesson, at first I was astonished to find that they didn't naturally play legato. And so I've always thought, well, that's the natural technique, isn't it? Your first encounter with a keyboard, and you don't think to link the notes together. So that's a sort of side reason. It sits naturally not to link the notes together. A more powerful reason, of course, is that ordinary touch, that nearly legato touch, is generally new for people who've learnt their keyboard technique on a piano, because, of course, most of the piano concentrates on the 19th and 20th century repertoire. And so there are lots of new things to learn about the ordinary touch, but also learning ordinary touch first encourages one to be expressive through touch, adjusting the length of notes to make a phrase come alive. And some of those lessons, of course, also apply to the later repertoire. For example, just concentrating on releasing chords together, and sometimes releasing chords to make an accent. It's all derived from the whole concept of ordinary touch. And there was another powerful reason for using ordinary touch, for explaining ordinary touch first, when we wrote the New Oxford Organ Method, which was the hardest task really was choosing those 20 pieces, because we wanted the grading to be very carefully managed, and yet meanwhile to introduce all sorts of different organ styles as the students progress from chapter to chapter. And there's so much more availability of easy, accessible graded music in those in the ordinary touch repertoire, the 17th, 18th century repertoire. And the reason for that, of course, is because the organists of those days were really committed to teaching. And so it made our task easier as well to teach ordinary touch first. It's worth just adding to that legato is so much harder on the organ than ordinary touch. So it also makes an accessible way in for the beginner student.
Another question, what is the 5-finger handshake?
Well, that is incredibly bound up with ordinary touch, and it's 5 fingers on 5 adjacent notes. And in Baroque music that uses ordinary touch, you take that closed hand position and maybe open it very, very slightly. But crucially, you jump to different positions, which we call position fingering. And so in Baroque music, the hand position and the fingering is capable of being completely matched up with what the music is doing, so that when you move to an accent, the hand and is moving. And so when you watch people, really good organists playing Bach, in fact, their hands look like this, really. Whereas pianists, there's a lot of stretching going on. But organists love to maintain in Baroque music a closed or nearly closed hand position, using the 5-finger position or close to the 5-finger position, and jumping all the time, jumping around.
Thank you. We did have a question earlier. Are there any other companion books to this book?
Well, we mentioned in the video that if you want to, you can access a list of recommended pieces online to slot in between the chapters. That's very useful for students who want to consolidate a certain technique before moving on, or who are slower learners, or just need more repertoire for whatever purpose. And we did our best to choose for that list of recommended pieces in graded anthologies, so that students are introduced to other books where they can find pieces which relate to the teaching in the New Oxford Organ Method.
Thank you.
And we've got a few others as well, haven't we? We've got, well,
we do.
Also we've got further listening as well, haven't we? Other resources.
Yes.
The list of further listening pieces. Did you just say that? Sorry.
No, I didn't. No, carry on.
Further listening pieces, and also actually the whole project of the new Oxford Organ Method spilled out of our 2 graded keyboard musicianship books. You see, so which deal? I mean, we could do a whole webinar on those. We'd love to, really, because that's very, very carefully calibrated keyboard musicianship skills using figured bass, score reading, transposition, harmonization, and improvisation as well. So Anne and I use the 2 books together, really, you know, dealing with musicianship as well, alongside actually playing pieces and technique.
Thank you. Here's a good question. How do you suggest incorporating the teaching of hymn playing? Given that my students need to be up and running with hymns as early as possible in their training, and they are generally played in legato style, I'm curious as to the best way to approach hymns within the framework of this method.
Shall I take that one?
Okay, yes, please do.
Thank you very much for the question. I too am passionate about teaching hymn playing. I believe it's so important. I too am keen to teach it alongside the teaching of the New Oxford Organ Method, which might make you question, well, why didn't we include hymns in the New Oxford Organ Method? Well, one reason was because a few years ago I wrote a training book in hymn playing called The Organist's Hymn Book. It's been out of print recently, but it's actually coming back into print this month, published by Kramer Music, Cramer, Kramer Music. So that is a training method in hymn playing, and it starts with the most basic simplification of the score with just two voices, but with that very simple musical score to play from, it's an opportunity to talk about simple registration and how to introduce breathing and what to do between the verses and so forth. And then each chapter then adds further, I was going to say complexities. I hope it will never seem complex, but it's graded through the book, 166 graded arrangements of hymns, but with standard harmony.
Thank you. We had two questions submitted actually prior to the webinar. What tips or advice can be given to help experienced organists who have gone years without a traditional lesson use this method to improve technique, consistency, and performance accuracy?
Were you going to answer that, Anne?
Oh, well, your
Was that
turn.
mine? Oh, okay. Well, we're very, very keen that everything is integrated so that you can follow through the book in a linear fashion and, you know, take and deal with all those different aspects. And although it is billed as a beginner's book, it's been used by a lot of people and was intended to be used by people wanting to refresh their technique. And as you go through the different sections, you know, you're covering everything really. We humbly hope you will cover all aspects of organ playing. And then just the piece is the main object of each chapter. And just before the piece, we have a section called Towards the Performance, which is more sort of inspirational about the character of the piece and to do with performance. Although there, actually, I've forgotten one crucial aspect we talk about there, which are our practice strategies. So is this part of this question? I'd love to talk about it as part of this question, because at the start of the book, we have 20 practice strategies, ranging from slow stave segments, unbalanced registration, slow music, fast. There are lots of them, which we hope you'll find very useful. But one of those practice strategies is actually performing, because we believe that part of any practice session is actually practicing performing.
Thank you. This is going to be a little redundant because I think you've just answered a question that was sent through email. I'm an older perpetual beginner, studied with a private teacher in my younger days, and currently a church organist. I practice about 2 hours daily, trying to make up for lost time. My time has been spent with the legato touch, but I'm interested in learning the ordinary touch, which I know you've talked about. My question to you is it necessary to learn each practice piece to performance level, or to the point where the technical, physical, and musical concepts are derived?
Do you want to take that one again, Frederick?
Well, it is linked with what I was just trying to explain there, wasn't it really? But just, I mean, well, we really passionately wanted to write something for just this sort of person, because we've taught so many people who have had maybe a slightly shaky training at some point or other, and often organ teachers themselves don't get the chance to improve themselves as organ teachers because they don't have enough students. So we're hoping that the book can actually sort of help teachers as much as students and provide something where you can just go through page by page by page, rather than having to sort of skip around lots of different books. And of course, there are the 20 pieces all the time in view.
Someone just asked, is this book available in downloadable format for those of us who read from our iPads?
Unfortunately, the answer is no, I'm afraid not. All we can suggest is that you buy the book, and if you want to scan the pieces onto your iPad, then you can still do that, of course. There are, I think, Frederick, am I right? I think there are some pages of the book available to look at on the OUP website. So you can get
Yes.
a glance at some of the pages before you commit to buying the book.
Yes, I'm just wondering though, this is a very good question. I mean, we use at the Royal Academy of Music a software called Encoder. I don't know if you've come across that, where you can access a vast range of music online and just play it on and have it on a screen. So I'm just wondering if it will soon be available on software like that.
It's certainly a question that we should ask of OUP, I
Yes,
think, don't
we
you,
should.
Frederick?
We should.
Yes. So
But we
watch
spent
this space.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time thinking though about the hard copy and ensuring that it really was one of those hard copies that does sit nicely on the music stand. Although it's not spiral bound, it is actually very, very tough, and they've got some special glue or something that means that you just can open it very naturally on the stand, and it stays open and doesn't deteriorate. I've been using this book for several months now, actually, and it's absolutely fine.
Wonderful. Do we have any more comments or questions? I'm looking, I think we may have actually. Just checking to see if there's anything that I missed. And I have my wonderful chapter relations manager. I forgot to introduce her today, Leah Semikin, on as well. And I don't know that there are any more questions. It was such a wonderfully thorough presentation. And oh, okay. Does this book cover any of the ministry aspects of being an organist?
We decided not to go there. In fact, the book grew. We were commissioned to write a much shorter book, but we wanted to be comprehensive. So the book grew to, how many pages is it? 300 and, no, not quite 300, 275 pages or so. And there was simply no room to address that. But of course, the wonderful thing about a companion website is that one can put extra documents on there. So that's something to think about, Frederick. Do you agree? But I'm sure, I mean, you're so wonderful in the AGO with your wonderful videos and documents, and of course the American Organist magazine. I would have guessed that is that aspect not thoroughly covered by all the facilities you offer?
We had, it's interesting, we've had a couple of webinars about that, and yes, there are resources on our website, most definitely. Another question, are there any videos of the techniques?
Not as yet, actually. It's wonderful to have these. It'd be lovely to think there might be a demand for that, because we'd love to do some videos.
Someone just asked, could you put the encoder software URL for downloading music in the chat?
I'll try.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's NKODI. Can I just leave it at that? NKODI.
Okay, NKODI.
Put that into
All
Google,
right,
and that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
May I just ask a question about when the ministry aspect? I think it is a case of you know, the English and the Americans divided by a common language. What is that meant by is that what we would call liturgical training in organ playing? I wonder.
I would assume that that's what it is, but someone comment if you are talking about someone else or some other kind of.
Because of course there are so many different liturgical requirements, you know, depending on what church you're playing in, you know, Catholic or, you know, Pentecostal, it would be completely different. But perhaps I just might add one other point there, is that there are a lot of organists now we notice that are not connected with churches at all.
Okay,
and are playing on digital organs at home. So we're also really trying to, I mean, although we're both, committed very much to our church music, we find more and more students actually have no church background
That's
and really
absolutely
want
right.
to learn pieces.
I think I
Interesting.
can say that the majority of my students are not churchy at all. They're learning because they love the instrument. They mostly practice in churches, though some don't. Some have digital instruments at home. And that actually was another reason we decided not to include hymn playing and indeed any sort of liturgical instruction in the method, because we just wanted it to be useful to as many kinds of organists as possible.
Excellent, excellent. Wonderful. Well, I'm looking, let me see, we might have a few more questions down here and we still have a little bit of time. Can the other resources be sent to us via email, the ones Frederick mentioned as what he uses as complement resources to the student? We can, could we put together a handout after this, Frederick, do you think?
Yes, of course. Although if you just
Okay.
go to, yeah, absolutely. It's all on the Oxford University website, but absolutely, of course, we can absolutely
Okay,
put
well,
together some links.
that's good to know then. You can go to the
Yeah.
Oxford University website. And on that note, I want to thank Oxford University Press for sponsoring this wonderful webinar today. And to also give you a heads up that at our national convention in 2022 in Seattle, Frederick and Anne will be there presenting a workshop.
We hope so, Elizabeth.
We hope so.
So sorry to break in. We've had some very positive discussions, but nothing confirmed. So we better not advertise that yet.
No.
Okay, well, from the interest and the amount of people that have registered for today's webinar, I can't imagine that, we won't want to have you in Seattle. I think it would be wonderful. And of course, I'd love to be able to meet you personally. Well, if there's nothing else, I just want to thank Frederick and Anne so very much for such a great, wonderful presentation that was truly interactive. So many great questions have been appearing on the Q&A. And I would be remiss if I didn't as well thank our participants and let you know that we hope that we will see you at Organ Fest 21. The Beauty Endures, which is our second year of virtual 6 days of performances, of interviews, of workshops beginning on June 27th, and they will end on July 2nd. They begin at 8 o'clock in the evening Eastern Daylight Time. And I should also add, my goodness, it's close to 10 o'clock, is it not, where you are, Anne and Frederick,
Yes.
because they stayed up this late in the UK to present this wonderful webinar for us. So I want to thank you again. And as well to let you know that our next webinar will be on July 12th at 4 p.m. And this is really going to be an interesting one. And I hope that as many of you that attended this one will join us again. It's called Returning to the New Normal: Identifying Recovery Processes and Taking the Time to Grieve. It's going to focus on the 6 R's of recovery and processes that will help all of us find a place of health and well-being, because we are coming out into the daylight after being in this dark tunnel of social distancing. And I don't have to tell any of our members how difficult it has been from so many different aspects. So we hope you'll register for that. That's on the AGO website under the Education tab. And thank you again to all. Thank you to Anne. Thank you to Frederick. And fingers crossed that we will see you in Seattle. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
And be well. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.